When technology hits, it doesn't really care how much expertise was required by humans. It just automates it, right? If the losers happen to be people who in the past were respected for their expertise, they often use that power to resist it.
So what kind of strategy have you come up with to handle this?
Before I started thinking about the trio concept, I would have told people the ideal team is a team of one person because they're only limited by their energy and intellect and what they can do. What I ended up settling on was trios. So in other words, teams of three. And if the individual contributors are going down, then the manager's going down. The middle management becomes very thin. The managers are going to look a lot more like angel investors because what the company entrusts them with is a pool of tokens, and then it's up to them to decide how they want to distribute it.
Jonah McIntire is back. The focus, organizational design in the age of AI. This is the agenda. The token illusion. Rise of the forward deployed engineer. The AI trios. Middle management's survival guide. AI in the physical world. Let's dive right in.
Welcome to another episode of Schelling Point. And for the first time in history of Schelling Point, second time we have the same guest. Welcome, Jonah. Yeah, you're the first.
I didn't realize this was like a historical event.
Exactly. Cool. It's like the moon landing.
Exactly. It's like the second moon landing.
Second moon landing, exactly. So very quickly, Jonah McIntire, Chief Product and Technology Officer at Trimble Technology. So maybe some context. We had a very enjoyable discussion in November about AI with you and with Kirill, GSM CTO. And since then, tons of things have changed in the world of AI. So maybe just to remind ourselves what has happened, you have Claude Code, Opus 4.6 just exploding. All the people in tech I know in Silicon Valley going crazy. They all like have AI psychosis right now. All have FOMO. You have OpenCloud, you have Hermes, all the agentic AI. It's all about token maxi, token benchmarking. SaaS apocalypse, right? The market collapsing, people laying off, company layoff. And now also, I think increasingly in the US, the public opinion is turning against AI with data centers shutting down. Everybody's like really, really scared of AI. So I thought it's a really good time to bring it back.
Those are mostly negative sentiment things, but I think the irony is that if you're working around this, you feel quite like positive energy, I think. So
yes. And another reason also to bring it back is, and I think we're gonna start from this point. There was an article, a post that Eric Johnson wrote about his conversation with some tech founder doing AI in logistics, and then something that goes counter to the popular narrative. And according to him, that was the expression given by this founder, comparing AI to cocaine. And I think he made a couple of very interesting points. I think both I reacted, you reacted. So maybe I'll let you first react, like make your case, like how do you disagree or agree, or how do you react to the post that was made?
I think the thing that I was the most maybe contra on was if I remember correctly, the post made this reference to subsidization that people are using AI or consuming tokens heavily because they're subsidized, like as in we're not paying the true cost of these tokens. And once we find out the true cost of the tokens, the whole thing's going to collapse or something. And I just kind of think that's nonsense. I think what people miss about the foundation model companies is that they're more akin to like pharmaceutical companies where you release a blockbuster pharmaceutical, you make a ton of money off of it, like very high margin for that pharmaceutical line for a period of time. And then eventually your competitors, like what we see with the GLP-1 drugs, eventually the competitors form a alternative path to serve the same market, or your patent protection runs out. And then you're in a commodity game, and it's tough to earn like serious margin off of that. But while you're earning that serious margin in the first phase, you take the money and you invest in developing the next blockbuster drug, right? So just like how we say to get to something that ends up passing human trials and being licensed, it's like $1 to $2 billion is kind of the typical number that gets quoted. Well, it's like that money's got to come from somewhere, and that money comes from the profitability of the current generation drugs. That's exactly how I see the foundation models. If you look at a foundation model like, I don't know, GPT 5.5 or something, it's profitable in and of itself, but they take the profitability and they invest in making GPT 5.6 or something. And so I think people who go like, well, they're taking investment and they're spending more than they're earning in revenue, is like, yeah, that's what growth is. They're investing in growth. It doesn't mean they're subsidizing the tokens. That's a misnomer. How about you? What was it that you reacted to?
I think that's one point. I didn't make the case as eloquently that you did. And since then, also, there was a podcast episode that I listened to on Events Like the Best with Krishna Rao, the CFO of Anthropic. And he made exactly the point you made, but even more eloquently. And the way he explained that 40% of his time as a CFO Anthropic is to make this allocation of resources, right? So they have a bunch of GPU resources, and he has to allocate. Yeah. And I think described there's like 3 segments. One is for training. I assume is the pre-training, right? Before the RLHF. Yeah. The second one is allocation to the internal usage of the token to improve Claude Code, the model. And the third one is to serve the customer. So the second one, which is to improve, they have a floor. So they try not to go below a certain threshold because they believe that they need to spend enough to make sure they are the bleeding edge. But then between the two, they can really reallocate. Depending the structure of the market, the client, and also another thing, the point he made that was super interesting. Obviously, they're gonna go IPO soon, so he's telling his book, of course. But he said that over the last 2 years, one thing they've done really well is to be able to allocate their resources to the best, to each type of job, to the best infrastructure they have, because they use both Trainium on AWS. They use a TPU with Google, and they use NVIDIA on, let's say, Azure, whatever cloud, right? So they have this hybrid system. And then the ability to allocate, to squeeze the maximum value you can is very important. And he's saying that actually he considers very carefully the ROI of any decision they make. Essentially, I think people, the narrative they're probably thinking is more the SaaS era of growth, right? The Uber, right? So I'm going to subsidize everything for free because I want to become the monopolist. Once I have, then I'm going to squeeze the price. That was the narrative. I totally disagree with that.
Yeah, exactly. And although I was pretty contrarian on Uber as a stock pick, I mean I still am, but I think their narrative was like, yes, we're subsidizing and losing money now to capture customers. Like they were quite literally, giving away money, and they would. You could get to ride across town in some cities for a couple dollars, simply because they were in a price war with Lyft, and customers ate it up. And their thesis was, well, eventually we will capture these customers, and their lifetime value, they'll stay with us, and the lifetime value will, once we raise the prices, we'll make up for it. And you could be bullish or bearish on that, but that was subsidization. That was a market capture through price leadership. But if you look at the token economics, like everybody is making money in this stack. So that's where I look at it and go like, okay, I mean I spend a lot of money with somebody like Cursor. They're very profitable. The tokens underneath that are coming from Anthropic. Anthropic's very, very profitable. Like Anthropic's buying compute from AWS and Google, they're very profitable. Like it's fine. It's not subsidization. They got that wrong with that narrative.
Hey, Zach in the editing room here. I realize that 76.8% of you have not yet subscribed to the Schelling Point. If you could just hit the subscribe button down below, it will really help us out and keep producing content like this. Thank you. Now back to the Schelling Point.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, which I think the narrative people need to readjust. I feel the closest you are to the model, to the coding, you understand the thing is working, it's real. But I think there's still a big group of people outside of tech, and I think that's also, if you look at the comment in the thread, a lot of people actually probably don't use or have used ChatGPT in 2023. I think the only one thing that's still unknown is if you have those coding agents, you can write a lot of software. Does that create value for the company using it?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I think that there's a number of sort of secondary or follow-on questions that are left unanswered right now. So ones I hear pretty often go along the lines of, well, you can make software very, very quickly or very efficiently, but can you maintain it and sustain it? That's one I hear. Another one is, well, you can make new software, but can you refactor and revitalize or rejuvenate old software? Or it's, well, you can make software, but can you roll it out? Can you do the professional services where you install it in a company and onboard people to teach them to use it? And there's or they'll ask like, okay, let's say that you can use Claude Code or Cursor or something, and you can make software very quickly. So who in the value chain gets to keep the majority of the profit pool? Is it going to be the software buyers where they just get radically cheaper software? Is it the vendors like my company, because we make software right now, do we get to keep doing it in the future, but it's just cheaper? Or is it the like Cursor and Claude codes, or is it the token providers? Like who gets the profit pool? And ironically, a lot of the profit pool has gone to somebody like NVIDIA as the chip manufacturer. So it's not, it sounds esoteric until you think about it. You're like, well, actually, you could be quite far away from the point of token consumption and get the majority of the profit pool. Those are all valid questions. I think what I would consider invalid is to approach them with a mindset that it's not sure if AI is going to work. Like, it works. Yeah.
I agree with you, and I think that's also it's very clear in the recent announcement, right? That OpenAI is doing the deployment company. I think Anthropic have same deal, and I think the hottest job for a young graduate is to become a forward deploy engineer to go work those companies, implement AI in legacy company incumbent, right? So I think is actually quite interesting. Like, how do you reason about this potential new trend of new job creating, those people going to implement AI for companies?
Yeah, what those jobs have that's interesting for me anyway is they're generalist. Like when you read jobs about forward deployed engineers, you notice that they don't have the specialization tags that a lot of software jobs would have had in the past. Like you don't have forward deployed DevOps engineer or forward deployed cloud ops engineer or forward deployed like front end engineer. They're just forward deployed engineer. They're meant to be able to do whatever you got to do to create value, kind of. So they're generalist. I've been reading recently articles that argue jobs that require relationships with other humans are going to become an increasing proportion of human jobs, because the stuff where you just have to sit at a desk and look through a screen silently for 6 hours, those are probably going to be done by AI. And forward deployed engineers are interesting because that forward deploy part of the word means you go get in contact with people. So they kind of fall in that pattern. And then the last thing I'll mention is they are a really different paradigm. I think they lead to a different paradigm of a company. So if you look at somebody like Palantir, who everybody refers to for forward deployed engineers, they came about pre-AI, and their contract sizes are very high. Like they have really their annual recurring revenue with a customer is very high, and they're often working in industries where the company needs like certifications, like Defense Department clearance, that kind of thing. But if you look at this new generation of forward deployed engineers, they're a pretty thin layer between the company and foundation model or foundation tools. And it's not obvious to me why a forward deploy engineer couldn't break off from their company and just be a solo contractor or small business. And I suspect that there'll be a lot that do that we may be seeding, at least right now, there isn't a whole lot of scale economies on this, and we may be seeding a lot of entrepreneurs to become small businesses.
That's really interesting point. I haven't thought this way, but you're right. I think if the premise is the model is a commodity, right? And then the harness or the layer on top is where the value is, then the FDE, the fraud dependent, are attached to this layer, right? And therefore, the value is you're not going to have that many. You may have once a layer become very big. But if the model are actually so special or so good, then their incentive is to commoditize the layer of the connection with the company. I don't care, right? Just go sell me. It's like basically the network of implementation company for Microsoft to implement different things, or for Oracle, for like large. And I think that goes back to also something I read that's quite interesting. I think it's Ben Thompson in Strategy compare this way of deploying technology very different than the past deployment. He compares that really for the first phase of implementing mainframe. So the decision making, the SaaS decision was much more grassroots led, right? So someone have a credit card, I spend my credit card, I like to use that, and then everybody's using that. I convince my IT director to use it. Whereas he thinks that what I think is correct is probably the decision at the C-suite level to say, okay, we need to change completely, and it will lead to job loss. Company completely reconfigure, and only the C-suite can make that decision. It's a very tough decision, but they only one can make it. And then you have to completely redesign the company. And in that scenario, it's not just a very simple, like it's not buying decision. It's really coming in, figure out how things works, and capturing all the context of the company, and then transferring that, building this connection or the context of the company for the model to be working. It feels like we're much moving towards that direction actually.
Totally agree. I think if you look at, when I think about these kind of rogue SaaS sale in enterprises, I think about stuff like Slack, where individuals would like Slack, and they would kind of use it on the, kind of rogue, kind of like hiding it a little bit, and it would become this. But they had maybe a credit card. Somebody had a credit card, so it was like shadow IT spend that eventually becomes formalized when enough people want it, and the CIO or CTO or whomever, CFO finally agrees. But to your point, like who's going to use the team credit card to eliminate, a third of the staff? Like it's not going to happen. That's not like, so it necessarily has to be a decision that's taken from authority rather than from use, and much higher in the organization. Also, I mean, this has been my experience too in our company. Like you can have the tasks that were done by a human moved over to AI in many roles, but the exact way that you interact with that AI is going to be slightly different than a human. So things like, well, you're not going to get on a video call with them. You're going to maybe text with them instead of a video call. And that means that the other humans need to know about the change you made. You can't like stealthily fire somebody and replace them with an AI, because everyone's got to play by new rules. And that again leads to this dynamic.
Yeah. So I think that's the point I think we both kind of agreed on in the comment thread, if I recall, is this evolution is going to take way longer than people estimate. It's not a switch. It will take time. Yeah. Some company go faster, some company go slower. And you can't really hide behind just watching. And the only people who can make the decision probably is the C-suite. So it's not. It's a very tough decision, right? So I think right now to be a CEO of a large organization is really tough, because you cannot afford to sit back and wait for the board to tell you you need to make a decision. Now, within that context, we also see recently pretty big news, right? So I think Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Block, Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, even I think Brian Chesky, CEO of Airbnb, they all come out. Basically, it's like they have to be AI founder led. It's like they go a bit crazy in terms of what they do, and they're very, very radical. Like the picture, the painting is very radical of completely organizing an organization. And I think right now the counter to this also is very funny, because I sent that to Zach, and he was making fun of me. Is do you follow this guy called Mo Bitar?
No, wait. What is it? Say it one more time.
So this guy. He posts a lot of very snarky commentary about AI on Twitter, on
Okay.
LinkedIn. If you don't know, we share the show link, but we share in the link in the comment. But effectively, this guy wrote, he recorded a post, like an 8-minute video, and the title of the video is "Unethical Way to Survive AI Layoff." And basically, what he described is how to prey on a very naive CEO who doesn't know anything about AI. And he referred a couple moves. The Zachary said that I've done those moves. So the first one is to organize AI Friday at 3 p.m. a Friday to learn about AI. And he shared the calendar we have at GSBN, which indeed we had on AI Friday at exactly 3 p.m. to share about what we've learned about AI. The second thing was to say that, the RAF loop that's really good, the RAF loop, and you can use that to automate things. So he shared that also. So it was so close to the truth. So he shared on the Slack channel, the team, everybody was laughing. So it's good to make. So first off, the reason I mention all this is, that's also a reason I want to talk to you is I think you've shared so many interesting articles since the last interview in November, and they all had to do not with technology, but actually with organization. And I thought that's actually the right way to think about it. It's not about technology, it's actually about the organization. That's the thing we should be thinking of, not programming.
Yeah.
And I think there's 3 of them that really struck me as really good. So the first one, I think you call single-threaded organization, the trio of generalists, and then the last one, which is quite controversial, but I think it's correct, which is senior executive who may block actually a transformation. So I'd like to go through them one by one, if you don't mind. Maybe first let's talk about single-thread organization. What was the thought process? How do you think about writing this?
Yeah, so I've been running my product and engineering organizations single-threaded, which I can briefly say what that is, but I've been running it that way since beginning of 2022 or early 2022. It evolved pretty organically. We experimented with some other organizational models. Single-thread ownership is predicated on belief that kind of focus was better than specialization of labor, and that you get a kind of a special outcome when you get a special outcome when you take a mission and you say, okay, everybody who works on that mission is going to report to the same person as low in the organization as possible. Like, obviously, everybody in the company reports to the same person. If you go up high enough, you get to the CEO, and voila, there you are. But it takes a special organizational design to get them to all report to the same first-line manager. You have to make trade-offs. Most organizations would be based around some sort of career path specialization. So you'd have all the designers together underneath a designer manager, and the designer managers report to the director of design, and on and on. And we said, okay, we're gonna have let's say we have 15 people working on the product. They're all gonna report to the same manager, and they don't work on anything else. So no one can come and ask them to work on something. They only work on this one product, and everybody works on this product is in the same team. So they really don't need to meet with anyone else, and that's by design. Like, the best alignment is no alignment. The best collaboration is no collaboration. Like, they should be a bunch of startup-like behaviors, a bunch of small, very focused, nowhere to hide, mission ahead of career. Mission ahead of career means, like, let's say you're a designer and your team only needs 80% of a designer. Well, if you were in a functional organization, that means you'd spend 4 days a week on one product and you'd spend 1 day a week on another product. And I'd say, no, like, the trade-off of having you split your priorities and having to change your focus each week, potentially, is not worth it. I would rather you spend 4 days a week doing design work, and then the last day of the week, if they don't need you to do design, you do something else. Like, when you're in a startup, if you were in a startup curing cancer, and they needed you to make sandwiches and bring them coffee, you'd make them sandwiches and bring them coffee. Like if you care about the mission, then you find some way to be useful. So this model really worked for us. Like, it produced better outcomes because there was like real extreme ownership of the mission. There's no place to to be like, well, I did my job, but the mission failed. It's like your mission was your job, the job, so you have to own it. It brought forward all of the contention of resources. There's still going to be two teams that want the same very talented person, but in functional organizations, the manager class is in this constant like pulling favors game because after the very talented designer finishes one task, they potentially could work on somebody else's team's task if you have them organized in a functional organization. So the manager class are always trying to get in the queue or jump the queue for these resources, whereas in the single thread ownership, because you're going to commit people wholly to a mission, the contention for resources and fighting over resources can only really happen like once a quarter. Because once they're in the team, they're locked. So it's still, you still have to fight over it, but you have to which leads to another one of the qualities was you can't hide from the trade-offs. Like functional organizations do a good job of overcommitting on goals. If you got because they kind of assume, well, we'll figure out a way. It's like, well, if you've got to staff it at the time that you make the goal, and then that staff can't work on anything else, and you can't go get more staff, then you think real carefully about your goals, actually. So those are some of the qualities, and it's worked really well for us. And now as people become more productive with the use of AI in the product development lifecycle, it's just like supercharged. It just works even better than it did in the past.
Is there any trade-off?
Yeah, there's a couple trade-offs. So one of the trade-offs is that you end up hiring more senior people, so you pay them more, basically. And this derives from, imagine you had the team, and your team is going to get one front-end engineer, and you can't share front-end engineers, so you can't ever get coaching or something. Or you can get coaching maybe on an informal basis, but you're not going to get real resources from anyone else. Are you going to get a junior front-end engineer? No, you're gonna advocate for getting the most senior front-end engineer you can get. So you get more senior resources because people can't be split between teams. If one team says I need 80% of a designer and another says I need 80% of a designer, they're probably going to hire two designers. Whereas if you shared them, you might be able to get away with one and a half time person or something, right? So you have this rounding up effect where you can end up with more people than you would have expected. Another is people can end up working on contradictory things. I'm not kidding when I say I don't want them to meet. It's not like the leaders of these teams meet and align on their plans. They really are meant to work alone, and sometimes they'll work in contradiction to each other, and you have to have the more senior leaders catch that. If they miss it, there isn't anything else that'll stop them. Now you would ask a question of, well, how do you take a big mission and fracture it down to smaller teams? Yeah, it is challenging. I think this is again where I think there's a beauty of the fact that you have to make the trade-off early. A lot of people ignore the fact that if let's say you've got a team of 45 people who are working on a product, 45 people is too big. They aren't going to think of themselves as one team. They're going to think of themselves as sub-teams. And therefore, if you leave it to chance, something will group these people into sub-teams, and they will eventually ship the org chart in some format, right? Now, your choice as a leader, you can ignore that reality and just, or try to fight it by adding in a bunch of cross-cutting committees or something, alignment meetings. Or you can, yeah, or you can be I understand that a group of 45 people is going to devolve into 3 to 5 sub-teams. And I will consciously decide what sub-teams I want to exist, understanding that they will have distance between each other. So if you make to give a concrete example, if you make a front-end team and a back-end team, there will be times when the front-end and the back-end drift apart from each other. They just aren't quite aligned. Or if you make a one application for carriers and one for shippers, like one sub area for shippers and one sub, like they will drift apart a little bit. But one, I hope anyway, a leader would be like, one of those is more strategically acceptable to me than the other. You don't want to just leave that to chance. Like you want to think about that and say, it's impossible to have 45. It's like like sometimes parents will say, I love my children all the same, and it sort of sounds all egalitarian. But the bigger the number gets, the more unrealistic it is. Like you got 10, you got these families that had like 10 kids, and you go, really, a 10-way even tie? Like really? So
even with two.
Exactly. So when I look at these teams, I go, you have to, as a leader, you have a chance up front to design the organization so that the things that are closest to each other are what you want to be closest to each other. And you're missing an opportunity. Well, you're basically fooling yourself if you think you're not making that choice. You're making the choice. You just either do it by accident or you do it thoughtfully.
Let me repeat back, make sure I understand. So you're saying, even if you don't adopt single-threaded organization, this kind of issue will arise anyway by the nature of the organization, right? The Conway law, right? Effectively, the organization, the way it's shaped, it will change the way you develop software anyway. By going more extreme into single-threaded organization, you're going to expose this issue. But then the onus is at the top leader who has visibility across to make sure that if there's an issue, to spot it ahead or to let it go, but to understand at some point there's needs a mechanism to resolve it, instead of having let them fight between themselves and resolve that, which is going to be very messy anyway. That's the contention.
For me, some of the sloppiest versions that I see in other organizations is, for example, they'll have everybody who's in the same office report to one person. So maybe you have an office in London, and you have all the people who are based in London report to the London manager. And when I look at that, I go, okay, so you didn't choose based on what the solution structure should be, or what your customer market looks like, or what your cost structure is. You chose based on this like sloppy heuristic of where the person happened to be hired, what office they go to. And do you really think you're not going to end up with like the London, like the stuff that gets produced in London is more coherent with itself than the stuff that was produced in, say, I don't know, Paris? It's like, for sure you are. You by letting the reporting line, kind of sit there sloppily, you're gonna ship that. It just has nothing to do with making a more competitive solution. Like more competitive solutions are things like a typical thing would be, do you organize people by your customer vertical? You may serve banking and importers or something. So do you have everybody who serves banking in the same team and everyone who serves importers in the same team? Or do you do it by something like currency or currency grouping, like everybody who's doing business in euros, whether you're an importer or banker, right?
I see. And then another thing you said that's super interesting also, which I think that resonates a lot, which is my personal belief is with AI tool, because AI tool makes everyone much stronger, much more independent, then actually smaller team in general, more focused team will deliver better results, because you don't need to do as much alignment, right? You can really make decision quickly. And then the bottleneck is all those handshake, all those coordination between people, and have a smaller team with AI. And I think that's the piece where you wrote the tree of generalists, right? So can you explain a bit more?
Yeah, exactly. So single-threaded ownership tells you how the team, it's essentially a macro view, and it says, well, how should the teams, if you have a large organization, how should you split those teams up, right? But it doesn't tell you how many people should be in a given team. And in fact, in our history, in my organizations, while we were running this, we had variations. We had teams that were as small as 4 people. We had teams that might be as large as 15 people. And they would be single-threaded on the mission, but the team size varied. Well, now skip forward. We get to this beautiful moment where AI productivity is sort of hitting us, and we can do amazing things with small groups of people. And I come back to, okay, well, what is the ideal team size? And the trigger for that is, at least in theory, in my mind, if I'm honest, before I started thinking about the trio concept, I would have told people the ideal team is a team of one person, because they're only limited by their like energy and intellect and what they can do. If you have the right one person, they really can produce amazing things. And many teams, if you really get down to the heart of the team, it's one person amplified by other people. So it's many teams. There is one person who's the core. I don't know what the right word is. I want to call them leader, because that's not actually their role, but they're like.
There's a test you can do. It's like the hit by the bus.
Yeah.
If they hit by the bus, that the team fails. That's the person.
Yeah, exactly. This like bus factor of how many people have to be hit by a bus before this team fails. And for a lot of teams, it's like there's one person. So, okay. But then I think then doing the like thought experiments around this, a large organization, I'm not going to make teams of one. If that one person is sick or indisposed because they need to take care of family, or, whatever, they quit the job, we're going to lose the entirety of the product expertise. Like, that seems extreme. So what I ended up settling on was trios. I think that so in other words, teams of three. Now, one of the corollaries to this is that those three aren't going to be specialists. Like they have to be more or less capable of doing everything that's necessary to do. And I think that cuts down on handovers, specialization handovers. Like I did the design work and now I hand it over to architect who then does the architecture work, and they hand it over to the back-end engineer or whatever. It enables them to have like more complete ownership and like holistic accountability for the product. There's less need for a manager to interject themselves into the coordination, the interdisciplinary coordination between the people. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it.
I tend to agree with this vision that I think the future specialists are still needed for very specific tasks or some area, but generalists are probably have a leg up. And I think we went back to taste, scarcity, blah, blah, so overused words, but now, because everybody's saying the same now. But those people actually, how do you recognize people who can do well? But still, I think specialists for some area, you cannot get away with it, because the AI today, at least, is not necessarily good. Won't get you to exactly what you need. And the example I give is the area where the AI really blow my mind usually is the area where I'm not very specialist in. The stuff I don't know well enough, AI give me something very plausible. I was like super impressed. Like, wow, that's really good. But the area I know something about, I can spot. Like, that's a problem. That's not exactly true. And I think it's the same thing with what's called it's the gentleman amnesia. When you read the press and the journalist, if it's something he's like, oh, this is totally rubbish. He has no idea. But New York Times, this must be true. It's New York Times. So I think there's a similar thing that's happening today. It's not going to be forever the case. I think the mode's getting better and better. But like, so how do you think about defending against this failure mode?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that happens, I'm familiar with the journalist effect as well. I've noticed it myself when I read The Economist, for example. If it ever has an article about supply chain management, I kind of go like, what, it's like so wrong, Now, I think the counter argument or the counter is that as experts in the space, we often overestimate how much our expert opinion, matters to a decision. So I'm encountering this all the time when it comes to engineering, for example, or product management. But like engineering, I really see it where people will kind of really lock into like stylistic things or choices that AI is making as it's coding. And it's like, yeah, man, but it doesn't matter. I realize that's not stylistically how we did it in the past, but very soon, like no one's even going to read this code, right? So, or someone's going to read it, but it's going to be AI is reading it. And then if
Are you
a
talking
human
about
ever
tabs
comes
versus
along,
spaces?
Richard, what's wrong?
Nothing. I guess I just don't understand why anyone would use spaces over tabs. Like if it's all the same, well, why not just use tabs?
Richard!
Wow. Okay. Goodbye. 1 tab saves you 8 spaces.
yeah. So even if you were reading, like here's a funny example though. Let's say you were reading, you can't do this something like that's tab delimited like Python, but if you were reading something like Java and it just had no spaces, right? Or or whatever, you get the idea. You're reading code and it's like there's no layout, there's no tab structure, like it is just dense. And you'd read it and you'd go, that's terrible. The irony is that you could ask AI to relay it out for you so it's easier to read, and it would just do it. So it's kind of like, hey, if my opinion on this is like a lot of the stuff is just it was important really recently. It really is not going to be important in the future. Now, sometimes it matters. One thing that I've noticed is that when it comes to product management, AI will not have contrarian opinions. It will work very well to uncover, assumptions that you didn't realize or kind of illogical follow-on effects, like second and third order effects from your ideas. But you can't, it won't actually come up with its own ideas. And one of the things that I find really striking is if you think for a second, like if you could go back in time, you could take Opus 4.7 and you go back somehow to 2012. No amount of there's nothing you could feed in terms of interviews or studies of economics or something that would have it produce the idea of ride sharing like Uber. Like I have not seen an example where AI produces genuinely novel contrarian ideas. It can expound on, if you have an observation, it can really like help you hone it and like take out the spark and turn it into a fire, but it's not doing the spark itself. Not that I've seen anyway.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I think I would tend to agree with you. I think it's that's why my mental model of AI is it's something that helps. It's enhancer. Right? It enhance your inherent skills, but if you don't have the initial spark or some slightly contrarian view, that I think the AI still don't have the ability to connect the dots and to have a truly original thoughts. I think there's mathematician Terence Tao, right? He basically, like, a lot of scientists start to use more and more AI to prove math model, physics, or biology, but still actually the humans we need, because there's just no leap. There's nothing original. Yeah. And I think some example where people will say, oh, look, this AI solved this math problem. It was more that in the training sample, there were actually examples where he correlated that. So it was still more extracting insight from the training sample rather than coming something new. I guess my contrary question would be, okay, assuming that's the case, then how would you form those? Where'd you hide those generalists, right? Means you cannot just have generalists. Like, how would you hire, train, or where do you find those guys?
Yeah, I find that this talent question is on my mind a lot. It's indeed very challenging. Like, if I think about the people who in my organization have turned out to be they have the best kind of like, I hate to use the word taste as well, but they have the best kind of perception and they form solid opinions that are interesting and often right. As well as being logically sound, and they're contrarian, so they're not just kind of parroting what the world knows, but they have something novel to them. There's usually some sign of those people having that, in first contact with them. I'm not sure where they learn it or when they learn it, but they don't learn it on the job. I notice it. It's like if you're walking down the hall in your company and you notice somebody's wearing a striking color, like they've got a shirt on or something that's a bright color. It's like I don't know when they put the shirt on. Presumably they could have been born with it, but more likely it developed at some point. But I don't know how to instill it in people. You gotta just have it. And if you have it, we might be able to like strengthen it through repetition and through collaboration with other people with who also care about these things. But they're pretty rare. Like my favorite example of this, there's a guy named Vivek who's in my team, and he was like an entrepreneur in India in the agriculture space, and he was keeping a blog going about his entrepreneurial journey. And somehow he found one of my articles and he like commented on it. And then I noticed his articles and we began like a pen pal relationship. And then I think like 2 or 3 years later, he had sold his business and he was traveling around India and he was like open for another job. And he ended up becoming a remote like product manager in my organization. And he's extremely thoughtful and insightful and has like good perception. But that story I just mentioned, like that's the weirdest recruiting story. You can't recruit 1,000 people that way. That's a very rare thing. So I don't know how to do it at scale. It's tough.
It's interesting because I think, I'm thinking the same thing also, right? Even one is you're not scared of using it, right? To some degree, it's almost like a children, not afraid to break some things. A lot of people are afraid, if you're afraid of using AI, going to break something, then you will never be able to truly let go and do something novel. The second thing, having a taste judgment, people are saying that. But now maybe, if another way to say it, it's probably more connecting the dots. So you need to some degree have multiple interests. I think it goes back to what you're saying. You cannot be, specialist is good, but I think the future is probably belong to people who are interested in many different areas. Could be as varied as history, philosophy, math, like medicine. You need to be very curious and to be able to see so many things, because then only can you create those connections that that the AI won't create, because those are non-contiguous, adjacent domains, right? And then the last thing is, and that's not an age thing. It's like, because I think people will discount and say, hey, if you're very old, you may not be. It's probably the mental plasticity, right? To be able to unlearn things and to try to learn. I think those are probably the 3 angles I think that you need to assess someone. But maybe the contrary to this is that's a slightly dark observation also. With all the AI tools, you may not need that many people like this either. They may be quite rare to find. And with AI tool, if one guy is so productive, you don't need like millions of those either, right? They may be really hard to find actually. As a combination, right?
It reminds me of sorry, I'm blanking on his name, but the author of Mythical Man Month, who I thought was quite perceptive of many of these elements, almost 60 years ago now. But he has this discussion in there where, like engineering leaders will say, well, I prefer having a small team of very talented engineers. And he's going, well, yeah, so would we all. But what are you going to do when you need to make like a big piece of software? You want to make a big piece of software, you're going to have a lot of people. And one of the corollaries to that is if you're going to hire, 1,000 people, you're gonna average down into the median talent, right? Like you're not going to hire 1,000 people who are upper decile talent. You're going to hire 1,000 people who eventually are at median. And but I think now we're in a time where the reverse corollary is kicking in, where it's like, well, if you don't need that many people, you can set a much higher bar on expectations and quality. And that's exactly the experience I think everybody's going through right now.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we're seeing in the AI engineers, like the AI researchers, were getting paid like millions of dollars, like really high pay, which is, to me, is very close to what you used to see in finance.
I could totally imagine in the future, every single engineer in our company will need an annual token budget. They're going to make a few $100,000 a year, their base pay. I'm going to give them probably half of that on top of it as tokens so that they could be amplified 10x.
I think this can potentially replicate to also people who are really, really good at using the model, because the leverage is so high, right? And I think the example when Jason was saying, now if someone goes to a job, it's like, what's my token budget? It's going to be real, I think. Because then you need to give if the ROI is there, obviously, on the CFO look at, is there ROI there? If the ROI is there, you may as well give as much token to this person. And they will have also in return much higher bargaining power with the company, right? To get paid more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as I've been rolling out this trios in my organization, where we're as we record this, we're somewhere between 25 to 35% of the staff have switched over to this trio concept.
Oh wow! Okay.
The role of the manager, it's interesting because if you get down to a trio, if you got a trio, you got three people and you got a manager over them. If the manager's in their space very often, that feels like over management, like kind of like, what do you need a manager there for three people? So it does call into question, and if they're generalist as well, they're supposed to be able to handle kind of everything. So you don't need the manager to help coordinate, make sure that, someone's available to pick up when someone else is ready, or whatever. So then there's a natural question of like, well, what is the manager? And going back to your point about, if someone can make value out of tokens and you just want to give them as many tokens as you want, I think the managers are going to look a lot more like angel investors or VC investors or something, because what the company entrusts them with is a pool of money, i.e., something like tokens. So like a pool of money, and then it's up to them to decide how they want to distribute it to their trios, essentially. Yep. And it's also up to them to do some coaching and kind of monitor, hey, is this working or not? And if it's not working, eventually call it and reform on a different task or a different mission or something, or change the staff if that's what has to happen. That kind of like thinking in terms of lots of bets. Some of them can go big and win. A lot of them aren't going to work out. Risk tolerance, ambiguity tolerance, coaching people who are earlier in their career, kind of earlier in their cycle and maybe experiencing their first or second cycle, but the manager has been through more. Connecting them to helping them recruit talent when they lose somebody, or connecting them to key other resources. Those are all things that I think there's a parallelism between angel investing or VCs, VC general partners and managers.
I think you've just unleashed a new path for VC who cannot find jobs because they all become manager. But
they're like, you know what? Jonah said I could be a manager.
Exactly, you're gonna become a manager. How'd you like to be? One thing that you said that resonated with me, because I think every word you use can be also applied to a pot shop for trading. So hedge funds. Back in the days, hedge fund was about, you have one brand name, let's say Paul Tudor Jones, John Paulson, some big name, right? And they are known because they're famous, they can take risk. And over time, all the hedge fund now, the biggest one, they all essentially what we call pot shop, where they have small team with some tight risk allocation, very diversified risk, and then they allocate them based on the results. So what you're describing, this is the ultimate model at the end, is a pot shop, it's a hedge fund pot shop, effectively.
And what I mean, where one of my next articles I'll come out. So if I think about the remaining organizational design kind of questions that I'd like to write about in the future, one is this evolving role of the manager. Another is how you sequence change. So for example, when you're making these changes, do you change from the bottom to the top? So you start with the lowest performing or lowest sophisticated teams, and you bring them up towards the middle or towards the best, and then work your way forward? So are you, in other words, do you think about it like some of our teams have found great ways to work and we want to propagate the best practices to everyone else? Or do you keep pushing the best teams to be even better? So do you let them get further apart, or do you try to keep them together? I think that's a key question. And then the last one, the one that you just touched on that's triggering me is it's compensation. If we're really honest, the incentive structure, at least for me and a lot of the other CTOs I know, there's this sort of like, engineers and product managers are not, especially designers, are not all that engaged in this AI revolution. Like some of them are, but they seem to be engaged for kind of intrinsic reasons, and there's a lot of stragglers. But I think the counter argument would be, well, are we actually paying them? Like, is the incentive structure aligned to make them pursue the absolute best, AI productivity? Like, do they get paid more because they become 3 or 4 times more productive? Like, not really. And I would love to see us move to something that is more like like an investment shop where you've got a real clear line to my group created this value, therefore we get a percentage of it. And especially if it's a small group, you can just say you get an even distribution of it. I mean, if it's a trio, you say you divide it in 3. If it's when you get a team of like 15, that gets harder because everyone knows that it's not a 15-way division, right?
Yep. And that's interesting. I think we're seeing early step towards a direction, right? Where some of the companies they say they have token leaderboard, right? It's very imperfect, in my opinion, right? Because there's a lot of way to game it.
Yeah.
But especially if everything starts to be measurable, and you can start to associate ROI on the token, it's a logical next step, right? It's a very logical next step.
Yeah.
And based on my career in finance, I think there's positive and negative side. Positive side, yes, we are all driven by incentive. So it's good to be like, hey, if I do this, some people actually, it's not even about the money. It's just it's a form of recognition, right? It's like I'm doing much more hard work than those people. I don't really care. This extra 100,000, 200, it doesn't really change the life drastically, but it actually is recognition of my contribution to the company higher than some other people and be recognized. But also it creates a lot of potentially negative loop also. So I'll give you an example in finance. Sometimes you get paid a lot of money, but nobody's happy, right? And you say, I did this, but this guy didn't do as much. We get paid more because of the relationship, the match. So you'll create, the money will taint a lot of endeavor where people are probably more pure, where they do that for the love of the craft. And that's, I think, the danger, right? One thing, I think later on we're going to talk about my tour in China. The people are actually very against a policy that was rolled out in China recently, a couple of years ago, where essentially central government started to cap the pay for people in finance.
Oh, yeah.
And my first reaction was, that's a bad idea. Like, why are you capping this? But actually, one thing that I kind of come around to this, I think actually it's maybe not such a bad idea because, especially in China where everything is driven by competition, it's so cutthroat. If you have all the incentive going in one direction and the pay is so lopsided compared to the rest, you're effectively allocating your resources to one place. And therefore, if you do something really driven by money, then money is going to move everything towards. And do you really want to do that for a company? That's a big question. Right?
Yeah. You're right that there's these trade-offs that, at least in my mind, I'm not properly accounting for yet. When I think about this situation, I think about kind of, I want to call it fairness because that makes it sound too moralistic, but it's just kind of a more aligned incentive between where the company gets value from changing and adopting AI versus where the individual gets value. I think in the past, I have in the past tried to incentivize to give teams essentially a percentage of revenue kind of outcome. It's very hard to do in companies like mine right now in Trimble.
Of course.
But in private companies you can do that. The thing that speaks against it are things like, well, success is actually many people's contribution. So if you have 2 people on a team and you have a great outcome, you kind of, I mean, it's one of you two did it, right? So
Yep.
when you got like 200, it's much more amorphous. And then the second is time. Like if the action that I take needs 2 years to come to fruition to be a success, or, you know, add revenue to the business, it's tough. AI helps with both of these. Like we need less, or we use less people for a given outcome, and we get there faster. So that's why I think it unlocks at least more aligned incentives between company and employee.
Yeah, I think that's one of the arguments people are making right now, which is the people manager, pure people manager, they're gonna disappear. Like all those guys in the middle layer doing coordination disappear. It's effective. It's gonna be very lopsided. A thin layer on top, making the tough calls, and a bunch of people who are the IC who contributes, who are really doing the actual work with the AI.
I think especially, at least in my organization, we foresee a reduction in that. In the middle management makes it sound really negative. I mean, they do real work, right? But that middle layer of management is, for one thing, it's proportional to the individual contributors, and if the individual contributors are going down, then the manager's going down. And then the second is, well, a lot of the work that the managers do is proportional to the quality of the individual contributors. You know, the higher quality individual contributors you have, the more self-managing they are. You put them in small groups of threes, they're more self-managing. You have less of them overall. Like the middle management just kind of cuts out, right? It becomes very thin indeed.
It's interesting because I think Jack Dorsey in his piece, he made some slightly different argument for getting rid of middle management. What he's saying is the greatest value of middle management is to maintain context across many teams.
Yeah.
But you can replace that by AI. Essentially, he's saying that the AI can propagate a common vision what's happening. It's like today it's very hard for everyone in the team to know exactly what's happening in the company, but the AI can potentially center, synchronize people in a much more efficient manner.
I've always been a huge fan of Andy Grove, but if you read High Output Management, he describes one of the key functions of managers is to act as the information distribution channel in the company. And he's writing it in the 80s, right? So it's before email and stuff. He's describing it literally as like memos typed on typewriters and then photocopied. And he's describing like a main function of managers is I collect information from my team, I type it up in a memo, I send it to other managers who then read my memo and they send me their memos. And then, I keep my team informed about what the memo said. And as you alluded to a second ago, it's like, I mean, that's gone, right? Like that was already pretty loose in the era of Slack and email.
Yeah.
It's absolutely blown apart in the era of like AI and Notion and stuff. So
exactly. Yeah. Okay. And then so the last piece that you wrote that really made me think a lot is the piece about the senior who may block it, right? So can you talk a bit more about this piece?
Yeah. So the trigger for writing it was an observation that I had, but others had, and one of my colleagues, Merton Fescame, had done more sort of theoretical research on this. But we observed that while it wasn't true that more senior staff are always opposing AI, as you said, like their plasticity of their learning mindset and everything really is more important. But it was true that they're more often opposing AI. And we were, kind of like what it did for me is I was wondering, like, what is that about? What is that a thing I'm doing wrong? I'm approaching them the wrong way, or is there something fundamental? And I think what you realize after doing some research on this is a couple of things. So the first is when technology comes into our workplace and automates stuff, it automates tasks. It doesn't automate a whole job. It just automates things that people were doing, right? And where it gets interesting is like it doesn't matter how expert or sophisticated the task was in the past when a human did it. Automation is kind of random in that sense. So you could have, to give a concrete example of this, you could have technology that automates like printing and handing you a ticket at a toll booth, which used to be a human being would hand a ticket at a toll booth. So that's a very low skill task. But you could also have technology that does something like automating flying a plane, and that's very high expertise. And the point of this realization is that when technology hits, it doesn't really care how much expertise was required by humans. It just automates it, right? So, okay. So then you have that's important because it means that when technology comes into a workplace, it's going to create this like winners and losers effect. And if the losers happen to be people who in the past were respected for their expertise or something, for a little while the technology is rolling out, they have like the social power that they used to have from being respected for their expertise, and they often use that power to either try to shape how the technology gets used, like for example, doctors shaping, or like a great example of this is lawyers shaping how AI can be used in law. Right. Yep. So it's like they either do that, or they may fight it outright. So either kind of try to be in control of it, or they may resist it. Another thing that was interesting in this research was that in the past, I think really up till now, you got rewards for going deep, like getting better at something over time, developing expertise on a topic. So you think about someone like a salesperson. Year one, they're like a fresh salesperson. Okay. Let's say year 4, they've been doing sales for a while. They have 2 choices. They could get out of sales and go to marketing, or they could become like a sales manager. Now, you go to sales marketing, you're competing like a freshman. Like you have no experience in this. You're just, you're going to get paid whatever the market is for an unexperienced marketer. You go to be a sales manager, you're going to pay more money. And this repeats over and over again. It gets even more constraining the further you are in your career. Like you really face a deficit if you want to change careers, right? So the effect was that people who have been in their careers for a while, they've been rewarded over time, not just financially, but also like socially. Their prestige comes from getting deeper and deeper in something, not getting wider. And the thing is that AI can often, because of the thing I mentioned in the beginning, can often just totally eliminate the advantage of that depth. Now, if you're like a world expert at something, okay, maybe it's not there yet. If you're just like, if you got 10 years experience or something, it probably can do what you do in many cases. So it's super fascinating. If you take someone who's more junior, they haven't invested into that sequential deepening. And so for them, if you say, hey, now it would be better if if you learned a lateral skill, they're less they're less selected into the deepening, and therefore less prone to resist. And this together, I think, creates a paradigm where especially as a leader, like for me, you can't just ignore this. You can't make it go away by ignoring it. So you have to come up with some sort of a strategy for dealing with these people, that you help them overcome the tension they feel of having their seniority or their expertise not eliminated, but like, yeah.
I'm afraid to ask, so what kind of strategy have you come up with to handle this? That sounds very, very difficult.
Yeah. So, okay. It's tough. I mean, there isn't a whole lot you can do here. I think that one of the things I try to do is emphasize, like, this is not a passing phase. Like, this is
so you have to stay.
Yeah, you would be better off to embrace this kind of early and go through it before others have to go through it than to wait. I think that's one. I think another is going back to the intrinsic enjoyment of our work. This doesn't work. This doesn't apply to everybody, but for many people, if I take something like curing cancer, let's say you were a database administrator and you worked in a team that was curing cancer. I think you'd probably be more intrinsically motivated if you learned how to cure, learned and helped contribute in the breadth of curing cancer than if you became certified at a deeper level for database administration on the mission of curing cancer. There is something to be said about seeing broader impact. I think humans, can feel that intrinsically. I think there's also going back to the social recognition. I do go out of my way, and I encourage the other leaders under me to go out of their way to recognize and elevate people who have knowingly made this choice to embrace generalism and to I respect their expertise. They're kind of the classic T-shaped experts, right? I'm not saying that they should forget their expertise. I only know if that's possible, but when I see them spreading at the top of, okay, I'm really, really good at one thing, but I'm now dabbling in these other things and learning about them, and I'm making efforts about them. I think those people deserve to be called out in all hands meetings and given bonuses and just generally rewarded. I mean, you don't tell everybody this person got a bonus, but everybody knows who is considered the person who's succeeding at some level. And if you pick out somebody who's made that choice, or you pick out repeatedly people who've made that choice, there'll be a set of people who are kind of on the fence and they'll follow where the incentives and the reinforcement goes, and then there's others who won't. I mean, is what it is. So
no, I agree totally with this. I think it's the world is going to change a lot. You can either sit and wish it doesn't change, that's one strategy, or just accept it will change. But then if the organization gives them the support and the opportunity to do the transition, I think most people should take it, right? And I do think it's something also try to teach my kid is it's a lot of things you cannot control, the way AI, the way the transformation, geopolitics, a lot of things happening in the world you cannot control, but you can control your own emotion and your decision, right? How you react to things that happen to you is something you can 100% control, and that will shape actually how you enjoy, even maybe it's painful, the transition, right? But you will enjoy more, you find beauty, you find interesting thing to do. And that's something that's 100% within your control. It's not a given to you, right? And I think that's the mental switch people have to make, right? No, super interesting. I read to say really enjoy all the pieces you read about company, because I agree. I think this is probably the most least understood. Most people should be thinking about this and not about just the technology and then the AI, the coding, which I feel a lot of people on Silicon Valley, the tech, they're all thinking the AGI god, right? So I think if I summarize is we're going to talk about AGI. We have an AI race. Once we reach there, abundance, everybody's going to be happy, UBI. That's it, we're done. But then the path is actually much more complicated than that.
They're a funny, I in some ways I love the startup kind of knowledge stack and ethos that comes out of Silicon Valley. It was very influential on me in my career, but I never was living in Silicon Valley, and so they are an alien culture to me in some ways. They seem to be kind of obsessed with infinites and the world is AI is either going to entirely destroy the human race. Yeah, exactly. They're and I think outside of Silicon Valley, it works for them, so good for them. But outside of that Silicon Valley culture, and particularly outside of the U.S. culture, I think outside the U.S. There's a much more of a groundedness in realities of the temporal realities of how things change. There's actually something I've always found really interesting about the culture coming out of China is if you look at like China's one of these, to my knowledge, it's one of the only places that its founding sort of understanding of itself as the Middle Kingdom is just, it was just always there. Like there's no like pre thing. It's just always has been there. And because of the size and the scale of the country, its borders may change. It may face like pretty terrible incursions, but it's not going to disappear. And it develops this, therefore, an ethos around how to deal with problems where some problems are not going to be solved. They're simply going to be tolerated for a period of time. And you don't have this finality of outcome that I think particularly the U.S. with its very short history and kind of extreme successes and that they celebrate has as part of its ethos. I find it interesting the difference between like a cultural developed where a lot of times in U.S. business culture they'll talk about chess as the like we're playing chess, that's the strategy game, whereas I think Japan, Korea, and China have Go, which is more of an appropriate sort of reference for strategy. They're completely opposite games, and you begin chess with all pieces on the board, highly constrained movement. You progress through attrition, where you attack and remove pieces from the board until there's a final definitive win, or you abandon because neither side can win, and that's considered like you both lost essentially. Whereas with something like Go, it's never quite clear who is winning or losing. It's positional. You begin with full latitude and you head towards stasis at set lines. Yep. No one, fully dominates a board and Go. You're winning in quite small quantity differences often. So it just the strategic mindset coming out of Silicon Valley is strange for outsiders, but has turned out to be pretty useful.
Yes. I think it's my personal observation. It's really good at rewarding big bets when they're right.
Yes.
And then the second thing is also very high tolerance for failure. So nobody will look down on you because you did a startup and you made a bunch of mistakes. Everybody actually kind of welcome that as actually a learning opportunity, which I think is very rare. And I think it's the right way to think about it, because I rather someone who made a mistake, who learn from it. Yeah. It's actually valuable, right? Instead of making fun of them, saying you're a loser, you made the wrong decision. Actually, they learn something. You should learn from that. That attitude, I think, is really unique. I think those are the good one, I think. But since you mentioned China, I think before we set up the call, so I was very eager to share with you also what I've seen in a recent tour. So give you some context. So over the last few years, things have been changing quite drastically in China, and I've been going back and forth in China for business trip, right, to Shanghai, to various locations. Yeah. And these days from Hong Kong, Shenzhen also is much easier to go. And always wanted to go there more in depth to understand really what's happening in the industry, because typically when I go there is to see shipping line or terminal operator, which is one part of the business, right? Mm-hmm. And these days, by the way, it's I think I'm kind of a transporter, it feels like. Apparently this year there's so many tours to China. After I went, there's so many. So apparently Lex Friedman now is in China.
Oh wow!
Yeah, Donald Trump is in China, of course, but there's so many.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I said the trend for him, but there's so.
I was gonna say, as soon as you went, Donald Trump's like, okay,
exactly. I want to say that. I'm not gonna claim that, but there has been actually a lot of AI researcher who actually now are going to China to visit, and people try to understand, as opposed to paint this very black and white picture of what's happening in China versus US. That's the context. And then I basically signed up this tour organized by Tech Buzz China. And it was a very interesting trip, because it's very motley crew, right? We have 15 people from very different backgrounds. Surprisingly, there were 2 people in shipping. It wasn't the only one in shipping. There's another person who was in shipping, in bulk shipping. The theme of the tour was to visit robotics, AI, EV, kind of everything. And what I took away, I wanted to share with you, I thought was really interesting, is while everybody's focusing on the AI, I think China is really shifting now towards the next thing that's, to me, the Delta variant, we don't really know what the outcome will be, is robotics. And there's so many things that I learned this trip that's very counterintuitive. So maybe, Zach, do you want to share the video of the engine AI? So I'll give you some context. This is a company based in Shenzhen.
Yeah.
What they do is they're lesser known than Unitree, but they build those humanoid robots. And then their characteristic is they have really, really good hardware that's optimized for fast movement. And I'll let you watch. So it's pretty amazing.
Left launch, right launch. Though the height and weight is like 10 years old strong, but the movement is pretty strong, really strong.
Whoa.
This is
Do that again. Can you do it again?
We just added like 3 days ago.
Can you do it again?
I'm very lucky to see this.
Can you do it again?
But most people don't know about it because most people know about Unitree, right? The Chinese New Year. So what I've learned talking to the team, the sales team, the commercial team, market team, they call their robots T800 because they love the movie Terminator. And apparently Terminator was manufactured in 2026, which is I know. It's a terrible move.
A robot that it's like demo routine is that it looks like it's going to attack you, and they call it
exactly. So the marketing, I think it's not the brightest, but it's just bunch. Okay, so that's also another thing that's super interesting. The robotics in China, the best funders, right? They're just a bunch of geeks like you and me, right? They watch a lot of science fiction movie. They probably have watched Evangelion, Gundam Wings, like it's all the mecha, like it's basically a bunch of geeks. They're not thinking someone who's not in that culture how to interpret this, right? And so they're a bunch of dreamers. It's very different than I would say the VC, the robotics in US, who are much more conscious about how to interpret and how they want to attract money from the VC, right? I think the next 12 months, what they're going to solve completely is this appearance of natural movement. So some of the moves you see in the video, we just showed, they take potentially 2 weeks to train. So there's someone wearing a mocap suit, do the move, and then you have to first capture that, right? Then render in Blender, which is a 3D model. And then there is reinforcement learning to match the series of movement of the actuator to create this move. It takes 2 weeks. Now, the first thing they do is they start to say, we're going to create a sort of a vocabulary, if you will, of movement. So they call it, they say 5,000 small movement. Like I go do this, is first this, then go this, to combination will create the actual movement. And then the next thing is I'm going to capture using videos. And there's a model to transcribe the movement and the capturing the videos into this vocabulary. And then I can render that much faster. So what's going to happen, I think, next 12 months is you start to see robots who do very natural looking movements. And it will take almost no time to train. That's where we're
like the catalog of maybe the catalog's the wrong word, the vocabulary of movement, of human-like movement is only a certain size.
Exactly.
It can't, okay.
Because right now, it's almost like if you think about it, it's like bespoke, right? So every single series of movement is a bespoke. So they take a martial artist who does a bunch of combo, they capture it and do reinforcement to match exactly as much as they can, right? But now, actually, if we start to think all those movements can be reduced to only a subset, which actually is not that big, then you can start to be much more better at optimization. So that's one path, which I think is going to come very soon. The next Chinese New Year, probably we'll see robots do very complex things. Sounds wow, how they do that, and maybe they can even train that maybe in live. So like you don't have to take 2 weeks to do that. That's one thing that's quite amazing. Second thing is there's no business model. It's a big bubble. So far, all the business model is just doing those dancing for company to the guide. That's pretty much it. Sorry.
But the business, anyway, for me, when I think about robotics, I think there's not the intermediary business model may be missing. Like intermediary meaning, if you think about like electric cars, you had these intermediary steps where you had to make like a battery that could fit in a car, and you had to make a charger that could charge the battery and all that stuff. And you could say, well, there's no business model, but you go like, no, once you get to it's a car. And like for these robots like that, the video we just saw, there's so much labor right? Now there's labor. I oftentimes think about these industrial sites, and like for that you'd build conveyor belts and stuff. But I'm thinking like everybody's home, there's just so much labor that a human formed robot should be able to do. Maybe the first generation it wouldn't be cost effective because human beings actually aren't that expensive to do many forms of labor. But I doubt that would be the case for long. Anyway, that would be where my conviction would be is like,
Okay, so slightly
if
slightly
it works,
contrary to this.
you'll make money.
Slightly contrary to this,
Yeah.
I would agree actually. So there are a couple of use cases I can imagine, right? So number one, actually in the factory, is actually a good use case. Something I didn't fully appreciate, and we met someone in Shenzhen who explained to us. So, so I don't know, like, for me, Shenzhen, the value of Shenzhen is because it's a Schelling Point, right? So everybody is over there.
Yeah.
In one small area, you have everybody you need to help build electronics, right? So that's the value. But then when I talk to the guys, actually, it's not completely just that. It's also the ability to produce a small quantity very flexibly at a very high quality and very cheap. So it's not just a fact of you have this network effect. It's also the ability to produce small quantity at very high quality. The reason sometimes...
So is that because is that akin to like somebody like TSMC who's accumulated like chip manufacturing industry, but they have the process expertise and the talent and the supply base and everything that they can make. They don't do it right now, but in the past they could make smaller runs of chips.
I think it's not. No, it's quite different. I think it's actually the exact opposite.
Okay.
A lot of things that we see right now is basically return to scale, right? So if you want to produce something at very cheap price, it's all about scale. You need to produce like millions of quantity, otherwise it just doesn't make sense. But what Shenzhen is really good at is I can produce something high quality, cheap, for small run. And the reason I can do that is because I have some experts, right, who do only one thing and one thing very well. They have equipment. So it's not everything done manually. They have equipment, they have skill sets, but they do just one thing, and that's why they can do that for small quantity. So that is actually the flexibility of Shenzhen, which people potentially misunderstand, right? But then if you want to automate that, it's not the robotic, the ABB large robot, it's the humanoid actually to do this. It's fundamentally a flexibility of a human being working on this. Because I think that's when you ask people in US why, for manufacturing, why they cannot do that in US, right? A lot of people say, oh, it's raw material is the thing, but it's also the amount of scale. The reason you can iterate in Shenzhen is because they can make something very small quantity for you, and you can iterate the first phase, which is usually the most difficult part. So that's the thing I didn't fully appreciate. The thing that I think is actually interesting around that's being solved is the hand. So the hand is the piece that's the most interesting, because if you can reproduce this handling something that's very heterogeneous, this is the hardest problem. And I think right now, some of the company we saw is actually they can do that quite well. And there's one thing that's interesting about this is about the speed of response, how you can grip something with the pressure and don't break it.
Without crushing it or...
Without crushing it, right. And that will go back to also what you're saying. If you case of helping people, like taking care of the elderly, you being to carry someone with sensing the pressure and not applying extra pressure. So this kind of high, fast response, it's typically new material science. It's this kind of thing that you need. So that's one. And then the hardest problem, and that's why I think it's very hard to see the uncertainty is very, very large, is the brain. So I think the hardware for sure will be manufactured in China just because of scale. And another reason I think also is, there's this talk about evolution, right? So the government wants to have less competition because it's just driving everything down to zero. And so the EV, the car manufacturer, they're going to do less. So there will be less company. But those supply chains still there, those factories are there. And what are they going to do? So now the hope is everything they'll go towards robotics. So what you're going to have is a massive evolution in robotics, I think, right? So it's like more factory doing batteries, doing the actuator, the harmonic reducer, all the components. So pretty much, I think the manufacturing of the physical is going to be in China. The model is much more interesting. The model are really difficult to do, actually. So there's two types of models, what they call big brain and small brain. So the way to understand small brain is the equivalent of what we use, the function that we have that helps us, breathe do the normal function, the how to bit, right? So you don't need. It's just we don't think, and that's what they call small brain. Small brain will be on the robot, the hardware itself.
So it's like edge compute.
Edge compute, exactly. And you don't need that much cooling. It's easier to, like, small model just for specific tasks. And then you have something called big brain that probably most likely to be in the cloud. And this one is interpretation of what you see, taking instruction, planning, thinking, like this kind of thing. And that's more akin to now the everybody's going that direction in China is the wall model AI, right? Which is not the LLM, the model. So the competition is towards that direction. So that's one thing I don't know how fast. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I love it.
So that's one direction I actually don't know where we are. That's something that's very different than the narrative you see right now in US, like about the AI, LLM, let's go more LLM. It's completely, I would say, perpendicular, because it's a different data set. It's not that data set is based on the internet. It's a real-world data set, how to capture that, what's the most efficient way to capture it. So it's really fascinating. And I think the next 10, 20 years, this is what's going to drive the innovation and a lot of things. I think the LLM will run its course. I think it's already... So maybe we have different opinion on this one. I think actually LLMs are already pretty good enough, right? The question now is much more about deployment, diffusion of the model, bringing to the use cases. That's the work. It's not about building like the machine gun. It's not about building engineer. It's really, we have a good thing, changing the organization, how the value be created, distributed. That's the new challenge. It's not about the model anymore. But the robotics is really about the model. The model is so not efficient. So that's why it's both very exciting, but also a bit underwhelming in the sense that we're still so far away from the robots. So all the thing you see on Twitter about like Figure and those guys, it's all bullshit. Sorry, it's all teleoperated. I think they just try to form the evaluation for the VC. It's still quite far away, but the hardware is going. I'm pretty certain the hardware is being made in China because the scale is just there, and there's so much money being pumped to help build the supply chain is going to be in China.
Yeah, it's interesting how the two different paths are being selected for also by things like what is capital reinforce. Like in the US, capital wants to reinforce these like non-physical industries, kind of exponential scaling as possible. Intellectual property is protectable by law rather than by trade secret mostly. And then if you look in China, China's got this like battery electric stack where you've got you got the batteries, you got the actuators, the permanent magnet, the kind of rare earth magnets. The chip, oftentimes not even like cutting edge chips, but just kind of like second generation back. Sorry, my light keeps going out. Second generation back chips, but properly used. And then, as you said, this like tinkerer culture, where it's really physical, right? You need to make an object, and you need a group of specialists to like come together to do the injection plastic molding and the material science elements. I'm like super excited about the robotics wave. I think, as you said, it's not a now thing, but in the coming decade, it feels like it very much will be. And as much as
I think the other thing I didn't appreciate as much also, I've been talking to people like there's another episode we did with a gentleman by the name of Glenn Luck, right? But this I appreciate much more after this trip is. The reason also why China is succeeding in this is also driven by the human capital. One of the factors we visited is a company called Goshen. They're the third battery manufacturer. And then the stat they're giving me was crazy because I think they have like a third of the employees are all PhD and master in material science, in chemistry, in like very hardcore science, right? So the reason the thing is working is not just, and I think that's what you're saying. I think to some degree, I think Peter Thiel was saying something, right? He was saying that you had a lot of innovation in the world of software, but no innovation in the world of physical. And I think that's because of incentive, right? So if you look at what's happening in China, this is really what's happening now because the next 10, 20 years, is the physical world. I think we're swinging back to physical world. It's material science, is engineers, it's PhD who knows how the physical world works. And it's not about optimizing the click-through rate of a website or designing the back-end engine. It's not about this anymore. It's a combination of the two. So that's actually really, really... and then also the other thing I found also talking to people is people are not that philosophical, right? So if you talk to a lot of people in the US about AI, it's all about AGI, this like vision, like people in China are much more practical.
Totally.
It's much more practical. I just want to get something done. I'm pragmatic. I don't think, which can be good and bad, right? Because that means if you're just very focused on the practical thing, you don't think a couple steps down the road. I just fixed this thing. I just one cog. I just want to do this thing well. But at the same time, if you're too introspection, the big picture, the AI, the transcendental thing, you may also completely like missing the most important thing. Like you're thinking too much on something that doesn't really matter. So that's also the contrast is also very, very big.
Yeah. On that element, I'm not sure if you've had much experience with it, but the drones and robotics culture coming out of Ukraine, as a function of the war mostly, but is very much like this. Like it's very much a decentralized tinkerer practicality culture, and they're just blowing away the Western arms development for multiple reasons. I mean, Western arms development are not typically Silicon Valley folks. They were more like big government contracts, slow cycles and stuff. But the materialness of it, I think, is interesting. If you look at the U.S., there's a lot of people who they would have been, even now, right? They would be enrolling their kids in kind of programming courses when they're kids. They're focusing them on these sort of abstract thinking, kind of theoretical thinking, where you get and the founders are kind of these philosopher king styled founders. I mean, they're very like abstract, thoughtful people. Which, when done right, is awesome. But there's a lot of people. It's like they're B grade. They're B grade philosophers, and so it gets really, But when it misfires, you get things like the DEI movement and the what was that? Oh, the effective altruistic movement. Where, my experience with. Anyway, in the past with China was just much more practical, much more like real. Super cool. I'll have to correspond with you, because I would love to plan like a trip to go see some of these things myself in China. I have
I think this
quite high.
And by the way, there's so many more trips being organized around in China. I feel this is the trend, definitely.
That is super interesting. Yeah, I now I've got like you've piqued my interest. I have to figure out how to get.
I'll put you in touch. I'll put you in touch the good people I know to organize those trips. Yeah, no problem. Okay, no, thank you. That was such a very long conversation. Also, I think we even beyond what we're hoping for. No, it's great. I think maybe in a couple of months, AI has changed a lot. We do another call, but hopefully, probably not. I think the thing we discussed today are pretty. I think we evergreen are always the case. I think it was really, really a pleasure to talk about the organization, which I think that's really the most interesting, important discussion to have now.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, thanks you again for inviting me. It's always fun to be on the show. So.